the the main points, and then leave enough time for questions and discussions at the end, because I think there's going to be a lot of queries and a lot of things that need to be perhaps made more clear. So let's see, just okay. So what I want to start with is some basics, because I think we need to talk about an art gallery, a museum, a public art gallery, a university art gallery. There are lots of um, um, distinctions to be made, but a public art gallery and museum is typically a permanent, not-for-profit institution, and its purpose is essentially educational and humanitarian. Humanitarian may be the wrong word here, but it's meant to be for the betterment of the community and to provide insights and grow our capacity for the visual arts. But fundamentally, it studies and cares for, exhibits, and interprets works of art. Typically, a museum, an art museum will have a collection. Public art galleries may or may not have a collection, but in general, all such institutions have educational programs, and Rodman Hall is no exception there. I'm just having trouble finding my cursor here to go on to the next. Just give me a moment. I'm not sure why there we go. I think what it is, I stepped out of Zoom for a moment. So I think what's important here is to ask ourselves why a museum or an art gallery is important. Because I think that's our critical problem here, is that I think our community isn't as committed to a public art gallery as we would like it to be. And there are many reasons for that. But we really need to make the case going forward that a public art gallery museum is of critical importance. Because largely, they're a place where people directly contact the visual arts, where they see exhibits, where they participate in talks, where they engage in art education, and contemplate the work in front of them. But it's a very direct engagement, a little like a performances or a music experiences, but art is a little different because you stand there right in front of the work. Some works even interactive. So that there are opportunities, it's a place where people can challenge their own ideas. Artwork is meant to surprise and challenge us, sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. But we're inevitably given the opportunity to see how the artist expresses themselves and creates ideas and talks about ideas in material and experiential form. So it's experiential and direct. And there are places where the community engages with and considers those insights that they might gain. I was talking about this yesterday with a friend, and we talked about how different the experience is of the art gallery each time you go. You may see an exhibit several times, or see the permanent collection of an art gallery over and over, and you have a different experience each time. And that's the kind of beauty of this situation. So somehow I keep getting booted out of Zoom when I move my cursor. So Rodman Hall itself, for those of you who may or may not have been to Rodman Hall, it's located in an historic house. It now has heritage designation. The house was built in 1863, and it overlooks the Walker Botanical Gardens and 12 Mile Creek. It's useful to know for those of you who haven't had a lot of experience of it or don't know it over time or its history, that it was once a much bigger property. and a property that included greenhouse and gardens, vast gardens. And it was much larger property that's now been whittled down to the botanical gardens, the parking lot, and the grounds immediately surrounding the house. In 1960, the property was acquired by the St. Catharines and District Arts Council, later named Rodman Hall Art Center. As a not-for-profit, they purchased the property and established the gallery. And the facility now is the historic house, which is in relatively untouched. You know, it hasn't been torn apart and made into apartments like a lot of older homes. It's very much intact. And in the 60s, various, oh, I have a typo here, 1963, I've said. So the historic house was built in 1863, and 2 additions were added in the 1960s. The main large gallery and some additional spaces for meetings and preparation and storage. It is currently designated by Heritage Canada as a Category A art museum. That means it can collect artworks and give donors special tax exemptions for gifts. And this is a coveted designation. At one point, Rodman Hall Art Center was a national exhibition center. That category no longer exists. There are no such things any longer. But Rodman Hall is a Category A institution, and that's an important feature. Only institutions that collect and can maintain their collections, exhibit and share them, can have that designation. So Rodman Hall's Art Center's operation began in 1960, and it continued through to 2003 when Brock took it over. Brock was seen as a white knight. Rodman Hall was failing. It had had a very positive career as a public art gallery and museum up until the early 2000s, when it couldn't meet its obligations and could no longer continue. So Brock came in and started to operate it. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think what's important to know is that over these many years, there have been hundreds and hundreds of exhibits. They've grown a permanent collection and provided art education for thousands of young people in the region. And the public gardens and sculpture gardens have been an important feature of Rodman Hall. Again, every time I move my cursor over here, I get out of Zoom. There we go. So that when I'm advancing slides, it becomes difficult. So like I said, Rodman Hall was taken over by Brock, and Brock agreed to operate the public art gallery, actually to operate the collection. The terms of the agreement, it was actually sold to Brock. It is owned by Brock. The property, the collection, the whole kit and caboodle is owned by Brock. And Brock began its stewardship of Rodman Hall Art Center and really transformed it into what we call a university art gallery. So it is the property of the university. A lot of its aims became academic. You know, courses were held there, student exhibits. It continued to function as a public art gallery. In other words, the children's courses continued, and the public was invited in. But the main purpose for Brock was to serve its academic needs. And Brock provided all the funds for Rodman Hall, except for annual grants from the Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council, and earned revenue from the community education activities and from rentals. So, Rodman Hall chugged along in those terms for for this long period. And in 2016, Brock made it clear they wanted to find another route, and they no longer wanted to be the sole steward. At that time, and during the intervening years, the 5 years that have intervened, um, we've really struggled to get the city, the region, and other partners to step forward and to join with Brock to operate Rodman Hall. The city has never done that, neither is the region, neither is anybody. I think everyone felt as long as Brock was operating the place, what did they need to do? And so the clock kept running, and eventually we find that um, that Brock has now decided um, to move ahead. We formed the Rodman Hall Art Center, Inc. in 2019, made various proposals to Brock to transfer the property and all the assets to our not-for-profit organization. And we produced feasibility studies, business plans, and a wide range of planning documents that would demonstrate to Brock that it was possible for the community to transition from a university art gallery, one that was solely supported more or less by Brock, to one that would be supported by the community. But we tried to impress upon them that that was a process. And given that Brock still owned everything, it was nearly impossible to get the city and the region and others of the likely suspects to step in and become partners. They wouldn't do that until there was a transition plan. Brock didn't engage us in the creation of a transition plan um, that would allow us to smoothly move from the status of a university art gallery to the status of a community art gallery. And a number of initiatives were undertaken, but we could never come to any agreement. We did look for shelter from, for a period of shelter from perhaps another art gallery like Hamilton Art Gallery, but this was never possible. And in 2020, actually in late 2019, Brock started looking for, with our cooperation, for a third party to operate Rodman Hall, much like Brock operates their residences. They use for-profit partners to operate the residences on Brock's property, and they thought that model might work for Rodman Hall. They didn't receive any viable proposals for that kind of model. And we felt that the writing was on the wall and we would have to ultimately share the space with some other entity, maybe an inn or a restaurant. And given that Rodman Hall is only 12,000 square feet, the entirety of its facility is 12,000 square feet, we didn't see how we could operate a viable public art gallery with less than that. That's the low end of what one would expect to have for what we do. So we asked Brock to transfer the collection and the endowments to us, and Brock subsequently made an agreement to sell the property to local developers. And we've determined that we will create a new public art gallery with startup funds that Brock has promised us, some modest startup funding as a way of throwing us a bone, sharing some of the proceeds from the sale with us, and transferring endowments that are relevant to us. So, so the work ahead for us is complex. We are already beginning an audit of the collection. So we've hired a collections manager and assistants, and we will be, in advance of Brock transferring ownership of the collection to us, we will be doing a full audit of the collection. That means taking every one of the 1,000 pieces out of their storage, examining it, doing condition reports and so on, and making sure that we have a full record of everything that's in the collection. And that's currently taking place. We're also now mobilizing to develop a plan for the, for our vision of a public art gallery. I think I referred earlier to the fact that we already have a feasibility study. Bukowski Creative Services in Guelph conducted a feasibility study and made very detailed recommendations. This was in aid of our Brock transferring the assets to the community and our community startup. And it was the feasibility study assumed that we would own the property and that we could exploit the property as what we called a suite or an ensemble of civic amenities. And that would encourage the city and the region to become funding partners because they would see it as a civic asset. And the art gallery would be among those assets. So we have the learnings from the feasibility study, budgets and full plans. There was a plan built into that for creating a DevCo, development corporation, to develop the property for civic uses. And we envisioned a number of possible uses, perhaps rebuilding the greenhouse, being able to, operate a restaurant, making it a four-season destination for the community. A lot of that is off the table now that the property's been sold. We also created a business plan. It was a preliminary business plan, but it fully laid out all the activities of the art gallery and how we would pursue those and fund them and where our priorities would lie. And in addition to that, we carried out a number of consultations in the community. We had a multi-day series of community, we call them conversations, where we looked at the community's aspirations for Rodman Hall and developed a lot of insights about what people longed for and wanted to see in a public art gallery and on that site. And there were some really extraordinary good suggestions there. In addition, the consultants interviewed more than 40 community leaders about the art gallery. So we have a fairly good idea about what people want in an art gallery and what we can supply. We also understand professional standards. We've done deep dives into what our responsibilities are for providing an, let's call it, industry standard public art gallery. So we know what the ethical standards are, what are required of us, and what is typical. We've done studies of other art galleries. We've looked particularly at Guelph, at Windsor, at the Ottawa Art Gallery. That's one example that's extremely important to us. And but we've looked at the governance models, the way they're structured, because given our current situation, we can structure what we're doing in a wide variety of ways. So planning, a lot of the planning has already been undertaken and in a highly professional way, and we have a lot to build on. One of our biggest challenges is the re-engagement of the community, and there are many elements to that, and I want to unpack that a little bit. Engaging the community is many things. We need members, we need people through the door. I believe in the period, the 17 years that Rodman Hall's been operated by Brock, the community was somewhat engaged. We did have memberships. They weren't, there weren't many. And the community saw Rodman Hall as something kind of separate from them. So we have work to do to make people feel that Rodman Hall is their place and that they're being listened to and that they have a stake in it. So Rodman Hall Art Center Inc. is actually uh, formed as a membership-based community not-for-profit. Um, we're we have a lot of work to do in communications. As you can see, probably, you may have checked it out. We've created a website for Rodman Hall Art Center Inc. that describes our aims and provides information about what we're doing. We have a small board. It's a 6-member board. We've kept it small and nimble. Our board members have stuck with this through thick and thin. It's been a long process because, as I mentioned before, we've made multiple proposals to Brock and gone through a whole range of options with Brock and amongst ourselves. And people have stuck with us. We have now a really seasoned board. We're looking to expand that and expand committee structures. But the biggest piece of community engagement, in a certain sense, is finding and establishing and locking in community sustaining partners, i.e. the city and the region are our big players here. I should point out that there are obviously opportunities for one-off funding from Heritage Canada for, facilities and things like that, and for other activities, and perhaps through the Ontario Arts Council, Trillium Foundation, and so on. So we can put together, we have to put together not only funds to sustain the facility, whatever facility that is, and also to sustain the operation. Those are two very different things. So there will be the sustaining partners, the negotiation, the building of sustaining partners to replace Brock, and then fundraising, community fundraising. Um, so we will then be able, once we have a lot of that in place, we'll be able to reestablish operations. Rodman Hall is closed right now. It's not open to the public. On some levels, the pandemic made it easy or made it necessary for Rodman Hall to close. And now the sale of the property means it's closed until Rodman Hall Art Center Inc. reestablishes a new art gallery. So we have to establish a facility, and we have to establish then the programming aspects of it. So maybe it's a good time for me to talk about site, because that's what everyone wants to go to, and we do too. We are in discussions with the developers about possibly remaining on the site. They do wish to develop that site for some kind of housing or real estate development. We don't know, and they don't really know immediately what they plan to do, but they are talking to us about the potential of our staying on there. A lot depends on whether that's affordable for us or whether it's in our best interest. In 2016, actually it began in 2015, there was a lot of energy from serious civic leaders to shutter Rodman Hall, move on from Rodman Hall, and create a new public art gallery in some other location, preferably downtown. Now that suddenly returns to the table as a possibility. So we're in conversations with any and all about potential sites. It's clear to me that that our fastest route to reopening the public art gallery would be through remaining at Rodman Hall. It still requires that we raise monies for improving the facility, because the facility is, as I said, is at the low end of what we need. Perhaps not immediately, but in time, there will need to be some kind of improvements and expansion, not the least of which is for accessibility. building a brand new place or renovating an existing place is a long-term thing. Um, our goal is to get the city to step up and undertake its responsibilities to provide this amenity for the city in whatever way it can. There is a task force, a Rodman Hall Art Center task force, excuse me, a Rodman Hall task force that has struck by the city. They began their work a year ago. They have yet to make a recommendation. I think they're going to move that to the front burner. So once we have all this in place, then we create our long-term strategic plan for making sure the gallery can sustain itself over the long term. And if there are capital projects to undertake, we're in a position to do that. So, you know, I think that's where I want to stop and open the floor to your questions, because it's a long, complicated story, and there are many, many facets of it. And I think some of the best ways to get at it is to hear from you and understand where you're coming from, because I can learn a lot from you and from the kinds of questions you ask. So how about that? I think what I'll do is I'll quit sharing the screen so I can see more of you. Great.
Okay, everyone is muted, so if you wish to speak, unmute yourself.
Yes, Ron Castleman here. I'd like to ask Jean, what is the current trend, for example, in cities of our size actually visiting museums, art galleries, and actually seeing the art and so on, and entering into all of that? For example, Barrie, Ontario, Kitchener, you mentioned Windsor. Like, how successful have they been? And is there a current trend for people to return to seeing art at art galleries? And what is the situation there?
Well, we've looked at, Barrie is a really great case in point. I'm glad that you mentioned Barrie, because they're of similar size. Barrie, you know, one trend that I've been reminded of by colleagues is that most Ontario public art galleries began in historic houses. And then they outgrew these historic houses or historic buildings and built new facilities. And that's always a stressor, because, you know, it's good and it's bad. It really brings everything to the fore and gives people the opportunity to, you know, say yay or nay to their art gallery. So Barrie, for instance, built the McLaren, a new building, about 18 years ago. And I understand they have been waiting for 18 years for Category A status, by the way, and it's soon to happen for them. So if we lose Category A status, we've lost a lot. So I think all public art galleries struggle to remain relevant and to keep audiences. And they do so, education. I go back to the children's classes and adult art classes. Those are a key way they keep people coming back. But also through their programming, finding exhibits that are, on the one hand, accessible, and on the other hand, challenging. You know, it's always like a symphony orchestra. You know, when you go to a program, they'll have some of the old chestnuts. You know, they'll provide the Mozart and the Bach and the Beethoven, and they'll also have perhaps newer composers. So but the trend is not so much for brand new art galleries, so there's not a lot of development, but for art galleries to really become more and more savvy about how they engage people. I just want to mention the Ottawa Art Gallery has built a new public art gallery through a public-private partnership, much as we imagine we might need to use. And we're going to be consulting with them. I have calls lined up for this week and next to consult with them about their process.
I'd like to comment about this subject. I sat on the board of Rodman Hall for a short period prior to its acquisition by PROBUS. And I concluded after a short while that the problem was not so much Rodman Hall trying to create a supply, a market in St. Catharines, but St. Catharines was not an appropriate place for Rodman Hall. There is no market in St. Catharines of an adequate size to support an art gallery. And therefore, I felt it was fairly futile. We could thrash around for years and years looking for options that would fit, but the problem was not Rodman Hall, but the problem was St. Catharines.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and I'm sympathetic to what you say. Our consultants, when they did the feasibility study, found there was a combination of kind of weariness with the drama and the problems around Rodman Hall, but that there was a certain amount of indifference. And in response to that, one thing I would say is we have talked about and considered how we might be more relevant to all of Niagara rather than just St. Catharines. And one possibility we've looked at is being able to do programming in partnership with already existing art galleries, like the Art Gallery of Niagara Falls, like Riverbrink, Grimsby Art Gallery, and create programming that we could either circulate through Niagara or have operate programs that are dispersed. So in other words, you might have an exhibit that has multi-parts, one in Niagara Falls, one a part in Grimsby, a part in Niagara, in Niagara on the Lake, and so on. So the other thing we considered is by partnering with some of the other existing art galleries, we could perhaps enjoy some economies of scale or shared services like storage or acquisitions or, administrative kinds of shared services. So, but I hear you. It would be very sad for St. Catharines would be an outlier amongst, or Niagara would be an outlier amongst Ontario cities of a similar size and smaller. For instance, Thunder Bay is building a new art gallery. North Bay recently built enough. Those are small working class communities. I don't know why St. Catharines and Niagara can't be among the Ontario cities of similar size. I mean, I would challenge you to name a city of a similar size that doesn't have a public art gallery.
Can I just add my comment on this? I think the idea of positioning it as a St. Catharines Art Gallery is thinking small. I think the idea is that it's a Niagara Community Art Gallery. That's what it is. That's the scope. The business parallel to that is Brock University itself. Brock University is not a St. Catharines University. It's a Niagara University. The community college is Niagara Community College. My thoughts.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm very sympathetic to what both of you say, and I agree with you in many ways. It's the inevitable problem we have here in Niagara that it's very hard to do things together. It's not impossible, but I hear you, and I think that's why the region needs to take a leadership role. And, I suspect St. Catharines would be happy to step aside. They want the art gallery in St. Catharines for economic development purposes and for quality of life and things they can brag about. But it is, and it must be a Niagara Art Gallery. I agree.
I think that one of the problems in the past has been that Rodman Hall's been tucked away down in the valley. Nobody sees it. Nobody knows about it. It's the old adage, out of sight, out of mind. So that's one thought. The other thought is that I think you need an angel. You need somebody with some funds other than the city to step forward and champion it. the city will get on board because they want an art gallery in St. Catharines. So they have to get on board with some money. But whether they would be willing to take the lead on it, it's hard to say. And the third point I would make is that I never thought for a long, long time that we'd ever get a performing arts center, but we have one. And up until the pandemic, it has been quite successful. So that's my thoughts.
Art galleries require a great deal of money to operate. In order to get a great deal of money, you must have an angel, as you say, or a lot of people who want to participate in its product. That doesn't exist in this area, to my mind.
You need an angel to take the lead. I'm not saying that the angel supplies all the money, but you need an angel to take the lead.
Well, you have your opinion, I have mine.
That's right. Is the permanent collection quite significant? In that, in the future, would it be more interesting to have multiple rotating exhibitions than having a large permanent collection, which is difficult to sustain financially?
Well, a lot of public art galleries do not have collections. We happen to have a collection. I don't know how significant it is. It's pretty much 60s, 70s, and 80s. It has some historic work in it. It's probably a little bit unfocused, but it is a collection, and a lot of people complain that we don't see enough of it, and that's been a perennial complaint, that it's not exhibited enough. That's a complaint for all public art galleries, that they don't show their collections enough. So, it is significant. A lot of people argue that it is a reflection of us. I mean, the collection is a kind of archive of who we are as a community and what we found valuable. And it's also not just our community locally, but the community of art in Ontario and Canada at large.
I don't believe that the collection is significant. That's one of the problems.
The collection has significant works in it, so very significant works. And, we will have at the end of this, at the end of this period that we're managing the collection, we'll have a full audit of the collection. There is a database. We know what's in the collection. We're auditing it to make sure it's correct and complete, and doing condition reports on everything. But I've looked at much of the collection. It is variable, but there are very significant works in the collection. There are lots of not very significant works. It's not very expensive to maintain it, but it is a significant portion of the budget of the gallery. I wouldn't say major, might be 15 or 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Art, I think you made a point. You talked before you mentioned the need for an angel, which I agree, and we are looking at that. I think we need, sort of symbolic champions. For instance, we're talking to Ed Bertinsky about the possibility of his being something of a champion for us.
Wow.
On the other hand, he's just given his entire collection to Ryerson. So we missed out on that. He was speaking to us, and he wanted to make a significant donation to Rodman Hall, but with the period in which we were in a kind of netherworld where we couldn't even speak to anybody, he slipped away from us. But Art, you made another point before you talked about the angel. Can you remind me what that was?
Well, I talked about one of the points was the Performing Arts Center.
Yes.
I never thought that St. Catharines would ever be able to put together a concert hall I mean, it's a blue collar town, let's face it.
Yeah.
And I just didn't think that the population as a whole would really get behind the thing. Fortunately, there were enough people, and I know the city took a lead in this. They got this performing arts center built, and I don't think it's necessarily the most accessible place, but it's right downtown, and people are going to the concerts up until the coronavirus thing. But it was really building an audience, whether it be for classical or pops concerts or popular concerts. It was getting, and it was good. And it is good.
Yeah, it has
So
been
I
successful, and it's
I
made
think
a
that there is, but you need a driver, and I don't know if the city's going to be the driver. I mean, when the concert hall was being considered, there were a lot of people who felt that the city funding that was a waste of taxpayers' money. And it turns out that it wasn't.
In terms of quality of life, it impacts quality of life in this region enormously, and certainly in St. Catharines. Without that, I think there's a real deficit. The arts do provide a quality of life and things to do for people that are necessary for people to feel like they want to stay here. They don't need to go to Hamilton or to, Buffalo for something to do, or even to Toronto. I think to myself about when I have visitors come, what do we do? Someone's come, I have a family coming for 4 days. What do I do? Those are the times when you really think, what if we don't have an art gallery? If we can't, where do we go? That's the kind of thing you do when you're on a Saturday looking for something fun and different to do. Those are the kinds of things that make people proud of their community. The other thing is, if we don't provide opportunities for artists here, if artists don't find there's much opportunity here, they move away, they go other places. And we do know that the presence of a creative community in a city has enormous downstream long-term impact on how the community evolves. So, if we see artists just slip away, and the PAC has been responsible for any number of new performing arts groups, theater groups, musical groups festivals starting up in the soil has been a wild success now for more than 10 years. And without those things, the vibrancy of the community tends to sort of suffer.
It's Russ Milland, and my wife and I moved 12 years ago. We moved here to St. Catharines, and we love it here. But we're far away from the Toronto scene culturally and all that kind of stuff. And we thought we'd go back a lot. We don't, because of PAC and all the local stuff. It's wonderful. But we do have memberships, even though as a director of the Toronto Railway Museum or a volunteer there, I can get into most of these museums for near nothing on reciprocal programs. My wife and I have memberships in the McMichael collection, in art collection up in Kleinburg, and we're members of the Royal Botanical Gardens. So I say, well, why do I bother going that far? Is because of the wonderful experiences they have. The McMichael collection rotates half their exhibit without special exhibits of local Canadian artists. About every 3 or 4 months, there's new exhibits, and we just feel compelled to go. If we're going to see the same old things every time, we probably wouldn't go. Same thing with RBG. Royal Botanical Gardens has a series of concerts all summer that is, as a member, I get in for nothing, even though I could almost get in for nothing because I'm also a volunteer there, which is, we pay for that to support them. And so what I'm saying there is that if we're going to have an art gallery here, it should be one that has a rich set of experiences that allows me almost different experiences every time I go. And that's the future of museums. At the Toronto Railway Museum, we're working hard now to develop a rich program of new experiences to attract people once COVID lessens, because all our research is showing that's the future of museums, is you've got to change your experiences to keep attracting people and having them coming back and back. And I hope that whatever transpires here is going to transpire into that kind of a model. And then I think it can be very, very successful here as a core Niagara art gallery. You know, the Niagara Region's art gallery. I know Riverbrink is great, incidentally. So it's not the only one we have, but I don't think there's any others, but I may be wrong, or I don't even know about them other than Riverbrink and Rodman in Niagara.
There's Niagara Falls Art Gallery. There's Grimsby Art Gallery. And those are the main ones. There
Okay.
are incipient. They're trying to create an art gallery in Niagara-on-the-Lake, a public art gallery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. But those are the main ones. But you know, the inevitable problem in Niagara is that, you know, there is a resistance to, you know, if you live in Welland, you don't necessarily come to St. Catharines for things. If you live in Fort Erie, you don't necessarily go to Niagara Falls. And so we have to overcome a certain reticence to, you know, for people to do things outside their own very small communities. Niagara is kind of difficult as a market for those reasons. But I think the PAC is a demonstrative of the fact that people will support it. And it has had a huge impact on economic development in downtown, just a massive impact. I love the fact that they developed the PAC at the same time they did the Meridian Center, so that we can
Yes.
see just how valuable hockey and concerts are as compared to you know, theater and music.
Maybe there's an opportunity to somehow link an art gallery with the Performing Arts Center. I'm not necessarily saying physically, but they could be located right near each other. And Russ was talking about going to an art gallery, and they also had concerts there. So you had, you know, a stronger attraction, you know, for people to come and go to the art gallery.
Yes,
Drink a little wine and watch and attend a concert.
that's right. The kind of cross marketing, the kind of natural,
Exactly.
kind of critical mass.
Yep.
And that's something that's playing fairly significantly in our thinking, that downtown and adjacencies are really important. Oh, I know, Art, the big point you made earlier is the whole idea of how hidden Rodman Hall is.
Well, yes.
And that's, I
mean,
forgot to write that. By the way, I take notes, you know, and I'm listening to you guys and taking notes, even to you, David, you know, who have a different, Donald, rather, who have a different,
if you did a survey, I bet you'd find 75% of the people in St. Catharines don't know where Rodman Hall is.
Yes. And I think over the past 20 years, maybe even longer, it's been a crime that there hasn't been better wayfinding, or that when they built the bridge, they didn't consider more clearly how people access that asset. And, you know, it's a civic asset. People use the park there probably more than they use Rodman Hall, but it is a driver. We do get people into Rodman Hall who come for a hike. And we do get people who put their dogs back in their car and come into Rodman Hall. But the finding it is brutal. And with the GO train destined to have its turn, you know, its station at the old train station, Western Hill will be transformed, and St. Paul West is going to be transformed, and access and visibility for Rodman Hall as a site could be far greater than it is. But it's shocking that it's been, what's the word, kind of abandoned there, you know, as a kind of hidden place. You know, at the very minimum, signage could have been improved.
Well, the signage is terrible. Get to the corner of St. Paul and
Blumerfeld.
Well,
I
yeah,
just,
they got a little tiny sign there, and you're going over the bridge, you miss it.
Yes.
I can't agree that the actual location of Rodman Hall makes any difference at all. People don't find out about things to do in St. Catharines or Toronto or anywhere by driving by them or happening upon the building. They become aware of it through the internet or the press or other means, and then that makes them want to go there. And if you want to go to Rodman Hall, it's pretty easy to get to. You can, walk down the creek or, drive, and it has a nice parking lot. So compared to many facilities, it's actually very easy to get to. I can't think the building itself is a problem, and it's a beautiful old building. It's worth being a destination just to go and see the building. But it doesn't seem to have been marketed in a way that made people want to go and see the exhibits that were going on there. I wanted to ask Jean about interim plans. Are you working on plans for, you touched on it a little bit already on what to do with the collection, and I'm wondering whether parts of that collection could go on tour or be exhibited at places like the Performing Arts Center or just any other places in the region. And the programs that used to go on at Rodman Hall, will they be able to be supported in some other location in the interim until there's a permanent facility?
Yes, we've had a lot of discussion around that. Is a great question. We have talked about in the interim, once we have the audit of the collection developing maybe in collaboration with Niagara Falls Art Gallery, Grimsby Art Gallery, some exhibitions, or, as you suggest, the pack. So perhaps getting the collection out and showing it. Some of the other programs, the children's education program is hard to replicate anywhere else, but I imagine that could be done. There are a number of things we could do. We are reticent to spread ourselves so thin by developing and operating programs, and at the same time doing all the work that's necessary to establish and start a new art gallery. It's just an enormous amount of work. And, in sympathy to what you say, Donald, that we are struggling to find people in the community who want to devote time and energy to this. And that may be indicative of the kinds of, the kind of limitations of this community. So doing temporary things helps.
One of the reasons to keep the programs going is to keep the Rodman visible to the community, because if you don't, you'll just be a committee that's meeting and nobody will be aware of what might be if it were more and bigger. I noticed you haven't mentioned the Niagara Artist Center at all as a gallery, a space, or a group of artists. I'm wondering why that is.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, there are some interesting issues there. I have been, and we are in contact and have good rapport with NAC, the Niagara Artist Center, and NAC has offered to help us with temporary programming and have made the same point you have, Peter, that visibility could be very important. And they would be willing to help us. There's a limit to what they can do. The other piece of the puzzle is that NAC is about to launch a major arts infrastructure project. They have, tentatively it's called the Creative Hub, but in collaboration mostly with performing arts groups, they want to create a series of spaces that will be rehearsal spaces, small performing spaces, maker spaces, like for 3D printing or carpentry, but that are more designed to serve artists, whether they're performing artists or visual artists, with the tools they need to produce art. And this is a project that has already, that responds to funding from Heritage Canada. And it looks like it could be a major project. They're looking to buy the building next door to them, build a new facility, join it with Silver Spire Church. They're partnering with them and other locations around the city to provide more of the production space for artists. And, you know, we've been in conversation with them about how we might stage or phase these two projects, you know, the Art Gallery for Niagara and what NAC is planning. And it looks like for now, NAC's going to do what they're going to do and we're going to do what we're going to do. But NAC has said they would be very willing to help us in any way they can. But the artists, you know, the other piece I think that's important is NAC's been very, very successful at building its market. And they have 400 members. They have dedicated, they have a lot of dedicated supporters, partly because they do a lot of funky, fun things, you know, like they have their rooftop parties, you know, all the time. And they have, you know, they studio space and have a, you know, a used stuff store. And they have, you know, they have a lot of events and fun things. Strut was a fun thing. You know, they've made themselves sort of indispensable in the community. And we need to learn from that.
I'm always amazed that they do so well with their small pieces sales. It indicates to me there are people in the community who are willing to spend $200 or $500 on very small pieces of art.
That thing is mobbed every year. They can't accommodate all the interest in it. You know, it's been from my perspective, it's, you know, it's a wonderful thing, but it's, you know, it is really more about consumption than it is about enjoyment of art on some level.
I think it's Russ Milland again. I think we underestimate Niagara region. We tend to call it a blue collar community because it certainly was in the past. Industrial as all get out, et cetera, but we underestimate how many professionals have retired and moved into this area. And I think there's probably been a significant shift to being less and less of a blue collar community. And as a result, I think we just haven't tapped into them. The second thing I'd like to mention is a metaphor is I'm involved in passionate groups involved in model railways, real railways, railway museums, and everything else. And in Ottawa, an interesting thing happened. All these little different groups got together and called themselves the Ottawa Valley Association of Railroaders. And what they did is they had a very simple organization, no incorporation, no budget, a couple of core group people. All they did was connect all the groups together. And once a month, they went into some local Legion Hall and had a rubber chicken dinner and a presenter, and they all got together and talked with each other. And so there also probably is an opportunity in the Niagara region to form something like that in the arts area. Nothing formal, nothing incorporated, that just brings the different River Brink and the NAC and those people together once a month, once COVID's over. And so you say, what happened to the Ottawa group with COVID? They're online every month. And no rubber chicken dinner, but they're online every month with a presentation and discussions and people like this collaborating with each other. And I think those that kind of a community, there's, I'm sure, a great opportunity to build one of those here in Niagara.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point.
To Russ's point about the people here, and Russ mentioned a membership in Kleinberg, and I have memberships in MoCA and AGO. Have you researched the membership lists from the Toronto galleries and museums that are people who are resident here in St. Catharines? Because that would indicate to you the real interest in such art.
I never thought of that. Never thought of that. That's a great idea. We do, so you mentioned in my bio, I did spearhead the creation of the Rodman Hall Alliance. That was back in 2016 when we were trying to ensure that the art gallery could remain at Rodman Hall. Our principle was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So keep it there, keep it going. And so Rodman Hall Alliance, which has a website, it's rodmanhallalliance.ca, has gathered a list of about quite a few people, about 100 people who have a dedicated interest in the art gallery and in Rodman Hall. And we do stay in touch with them. And the other thing just of interest to you all, on their website under, I think, resources, there's a page of resources, and it includes, you know, the feasibility study, all kinds of background study, all the historic documentation on the house. There are a range of really critical documents. If you want to dig in a little deeper, they're there. But yeah, membership, I never thought about mining the membership from the, you know, AGH or the, you know, or the McMichael. So maybe as we close, you know, unless you have more questions, I'm wondering if I could welcome you. I've got my, I can share the screen before we end with my contact information, but I welcome any of you who have any more, any interest, any ideas, any willingness to be a part of this work. We really need, we need a brain trust. We need more, we need a lot of practical things too. For instance, we had to redo our application for charitable status because it was premised on our receiving the property from Brock. Now that that's changed, so we're about to resubmit another charitable application for charitable status, but that takes a lot of time. We need legal help. We have raised money and done a lot of legal work, and consulted some of the most prominent charitable and trust lawyers around the situation at Rodman Hall. So we've already done a lot of that work, but in terms of setting up our governance and so on, we need accountants, we need legal work, we need just people with good sense. Russ and I had a great conversation about organizational development, and his insights were incredibly helpful. So if you think you have insights or ideas or a willingness to be involved, please contact me. So what I might do before we go is just share a screen again with my contact information so that you have that. Where did that go? So I'll share the screen and go back here so you can see. So there's my personal email address there and my phone number. There's the Rodman Hall Art Center.ca. Sorry, that is a cap, it's a lowercase Rodman Hall Art Center. I'll change that. And then you can contact me as well through the Rodman Hall Art Center.ca, through our website. And you can, on the website, submit a request for more information or to be involved. You can submit there. And the Rodman Hall Alliance.ca site has a lot of background information.
I have the screen capture of the public art for our newsletter editor, Gene.
Great. Great. I think the questions you've had have been really valuable. And I've made notes of the kinds of issues you've raised, and we will use those as we go forward. It's not, your insights have been have been really on target with a lot of the things that we have discussed. There's so much more work to be done.
the challenges that